The massive crystalline halls of the Galactic Council Station hummed with nervous energy. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered for what many considered the most important meeting in galactic history. The discovery of a new species always brought excitement, but this time was different. This time, the new species had found them first. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vraxian Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes, his 4 arms trembling slightly. As the current council speaker, the responsibility of first contact fell to him. Through the massive viewing ports, he could see the strange vessel hanging motionless in space. It was unlike anything in their databases, angular, metallic, and somehow intimidating despite being smaller than most council ships. Speaker Zethkar, called out Ambassador Yilnara, her crystalline form shimmering with anxiety. The vessel has been silent for 6 hours. Our translators are ready, but they refuse to communicate through normal diplomatic channels. Zethkar's primary eyes focused on the data pad floating before him. The species called themselves humans, from a planet called Earth in the outer rim of the galaxy. What troubled him most was how they had arrived. No jump signatures, no warp trails, no dimensional rifts. One moment space was empty, the next their ship was there, as if it had been waiting all along. "Sir," interrupted Communications Officer Drelmoth, "they're finally responding, but they're not using our diplomatic frequencies. They're broadcasting on what appears to be an ancient military channel." The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the human vessel. 3 figures stood before the camera, wearing matching dark clothing with various patches and insignia. The one in the center stepped forward, his face hard and weathered, with eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "This is Colonel Marcus Stone, United States Army Special Forces representing Earth and the human species," the figure said in a voice that carried absolute authority. "We're here for the Galactic Council, and we're coming aboard whether you like it or not." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. In 10,000 years of council history, no species had ever demanded entry to their halls. Diplomacy was always handled through careful protocols, formal invitations, and lengthy negotiations. Ambassador Telvanni of the Peaceful Collective rose from her seat, her gossamer wings fluttering with indignation. "The audacity! They cannot simply demand entry. There are protocols, procedures, laws that govern first contact." But Zethkar was studying the humans more carefully. Something in their posture, their bearing, reminded him of stories his grandfather had told about the ancient warrior races that had once threatened the galaxy before civilization had tamed them. These humans carried themselves like predators, like beings who had earned their confidence through violence rather than diplomacy. "What are your intentions?" Zethkar asked, his voice carrying across the communication link. "Why do you approach the council in this manner?" The human called Stone exchanged glances with his companions before answering. "Because we've been watching you for longer than you think, and we know what's coming. The Devourers are 3 months out from your core worlds, and your entire defense fleet couldn't stop a single scout ship." The chamber erupted in chaos. The Devourers were legend, a myth used to frighten children and explain ancient ruins found on dead worlds. Most council members had dismissed them as folklore created by primitive civilizations trying to explain natural disasters. "Impossible," declared Admiral Coxthane, his scaled hide rippling with disbelief. "Our long-range sensors show no such threat. The Devourer myth has been thoroughly debunked by our xenoarchaeologists." The second human, a woman with short blonde hair and scars across her visible skin, stepped forward. "Major Sarah Chen, Army Rangers. Your sensors can't detect them because they travel through folded space-time, not normal hyperspace." "We know because we've been fighting them for 20 years. The third human remained silent, but his eyes constantly swept the chamber visible on screen, cataloging exits, threats, and tactical positions with the systematic precision of a professional soldier. Zethkar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. "Fighting them? You've encountered these beings before?" Stone nodded grimly. "First contact wasn't exactly friendly. They showed up in our solar system in 2157, started consuming our outer planets, turned Jupiter into some kind of feeding station. We've been at war ever since." The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. This species, these humans, had been engaged in warfare with a threat the Council didn't even believe existed. More troubling was the fact that they were still alive to talk about it. "How?" The question came from Ambassador Quintel, his insectoid form clicking with nervous energy. "Our projections suggest that a species at your apparent technological level would be consumed within days of first contact with devourers." Major Chen's expression hardened. "Because we don't fight like you. We don't send fleets to meet them in open space. We don't try to negotiate or understand them. We hunt them like the parasites they are." The silent third human finally spoke, his voice carrying a distinct accent. "Captain Diego Morales, Marine Force Recon. We learned real quick that these things don't respond to anything except overwhelming violence, so we got real good at violence." Through the viewing ports, more human vessels began materializing around the Council station, not appearing from jump space, not decloaking, simply becoming visible as if they had been there all along. The implications of such stealth technology sent ripples of fear through the assembled diplomats. "How many ships do you have?" Admiral Coxthane demanded, his military instincts overriding diplomatic protocol. "Enough," Stone replied simply. "We're not here to threaten you. We're here to save you. The Devourers have been systematically working their way through this galaxy for the past century. They hit the isolated systems first, the ones too far out for the Council to notice. They've consumed 47 star systems in this sector alone. The number matched exactly with the systems that had gone silent over the past 100 years. Systems the Council had written off as technological failures or natural disasters. The pattern was suddenly, horrifyingly clear. Ambassador Yilnara's crystalline form was pulsing with distress patterns. "If what you say is true, why haven't you contacted us before? Why appear now?" "Because you weren't ready," Colonel Stone said bluntly. "Your entire civilization is built on cooperation, negotiation, peaceful resolution of conflicts. You've bred the warrior instinct out of most of your species. The Devourers are a warrior species. They only understand strength, and they've never encountered a prey species that fights back effectively." Captain Morales gestured to something off-screen, and technical readouts began appearing on the Council's displays. Star charts showing Devourer movement patterns, technological specifications for weapons the Council had never imagined, tactical analyses of battles fought in the void between stars. "We've been preparing for this moment for 2 decades, Major Chen explained. "Building fleets, training soldiers, developing weapons specifically designed to kill Devourers. We know their weaknesses, their patterns, their psychology. But we can't protect the entire galaxy alone." Zethkar studied the data streaming across his screens. The human weapons were primitive by Council standards, but they were also brutal, efficient, and designed with one purpose: maximum destruction of organic matter. Where Council technology focused on precision and minimal collateral damage, human weapons seemed designed to obliterate everything in their path. "You want us to become warriors," he said, understanding finally dawning. "You want us to abandon 10 millennia of civilization and become killers." Stone's expression didn't change. "No. We want you to survive. The choice of how you do that is yours. But the Devourers will be here in 93 days. Your choice is simple. Learn to fight or learn to die." The chamber fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems. Through the viewing ports, the human fleet hung in space like sleeping predators, their angular forms so different from the graceful curves of Council vessels. Ambassador Telvanni was the first to break the silence. Assuming we believe your claims, what exactly are you proposing? Major Chen stepped forward. We train your people. We share our weapons technology. We coordinate our fleets. And when the Devourers arrive, we hit them with everything we have all at once, before they can establish a foothold. And if we refuse, Admiral Coxthane asked. Captain Morales answered with brutal honesty. Then, in 94 days, this station becomes a feeding ground, and the Galactic Council becomes an extinct political entity. We'll fall back to our prepared positions and continue the fight alone. The weight of the decision pressed down on every representative in the chamber. 10,000 years of peaceful civilization hung in the balance, threatened not just by the approaching Devourers, but by the choice to either embrace violence or face extinction. Zethkar looked around the chamber at the faces of his fellow council members. Fear, disbelief, anger, and desperate hope warred in their expressions. The humans had given them an impossible choice: abandon everything they stood for, or lose everything they had built. But as he studied the tactical displays showing the approaching Devourer swarm, one thing became crystal clear. The humans had traveled across the galaxy not as conquerors, but as reluctant saviors. They had come to offer the one gift that might preserve the Council's civilization: the knowledge of how to wage war against an implacable enemy. The question now was whether the Galactic Council could learn to become something it had never been before: an alliance of warriors united against a common threat. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the dark between the stars, an ancient hunger was drawing ever closer to the heart of Council space. The training grounds on Council Station 7 had been transformed beyond recognition. What was once a peaceful botanical garden where diplomats held quiet meetings now resembled something from humanity's most violent conflicts. Obstacle courses wound between demolished flower beds, firing ranges had been carved into meditation alcoves, and the gentle sounds of flowing water had been replaced by the harsh crack of weapons fire. Ambassador Zethkar ducked as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head, his forearms struggling to maintain grip on the human rifle Colonel Stone had forced into his hands. Sweat poured from his exoskeleton despite the controlled environment, and every instinct screamed at him to find cover and wait for the violence to end. "Stop thinking like prey!" Major Chen barked from behind a makeshift barrier. "Devourers can smell fear across a star system. You think like food. You become food." Around the training ground, representatives from dozens of species were learning the same brutal lessons. The crystalline Yilnara had shattered 3 appendages learning to handle grenades. Admiral Coxthane's scales were scorched from plasma backwash, but his reptilian features showed grim determination as he mastered the art of close-quarters combat. The transformation hadn't been easy. For the first week, half the council had demanded the humans leave. Traditional pacifist species like the Ethereal Collective had withdrawn entirely, choosing to trust in their advanced shields and automated defenses rather than soil themselves with weapons training. But then the reports started coming in. Long-range scouts, pushing deeper into unexplored space than ever before, began sending back data that confirmed humanity's darkest warnings: dead systems, planets stripped to their cores, ancient ruins that matched devourer consumption patterns. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. Captain Morales emerged from behind cover, moving with fluid precision as he neutralized training targets with methodical efficiency. "Time!" he called out, and the simulation ended. "Better. Zethkar, you're still telegraphing your movements. Coxthane, good aggression, but watch your ammunition conservation." The past month had been the most intensive training program in galactic history. Human military instructors had spread throughout Council space, teaching everything from small unit tactics to fleet-scale strategy. The cultural shock was enormous. Species that had never raised weapons in anger were learning to think like soldiers. But it was working. Slowly, painfully, the Council's representatives were developing something they'd never possessed, a warrior mindset. "Sir," a young Vraxian technician approached Zethkar, his voice trembling with excitement. "The weapons production facilities on Kepler 442b are reporting full operational capacity. The human designs are incredible, brutal, but incredibly effective." Zethkar nodded, reviewing the data on his pad. Human weapons technology was primitive compared to Council standards, but it was also specifically designed for one purpose: killing biological targets as efficiently as possible. Where Council weapons were elegant tools of precision, human weapons were instruments of devastating destruction. The electromagnetic pulse rifles could disrupt nervous systems across multiple species. The plasma cannons generated heat intense enough to boil water inside organic tissue. The kinetic penetrators could punch through any known biological armor. Every human weapon seemed designed by beings who had studied death as carefully as the Council had studied life. Colonel Stone approached their group, his battle-scarred face showing approval. "Your people learn fast, faster than we expected. Most of our projections assumed it would take years to develop effective combat instincts." "Fear is a powerful teacher," Zethkar replied grimly. "The long-range scans are confirming your timeline. The Devourers will reach our outer territories in 47 days. Stone nodded. "Then it's time for the next phase. Come with me." He led them through the station's corridors to a heavily secured section that hadn't existed before the humans arrived. The walls here were lined with a strange metallic compound that seemed to absorb light, and the air itself felt different, charged with potential energy. "Welcome to the War Room," Major Chen announced as massive doors slid open. The chamber beyond was a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with Council territories highlighted in blue and projected Devourer positions marked in ominous red. But it was the third color that drew their attention: green markers scattered throughout space, representing human assets they'd never suspected existed. "Holy ancestors," Admiral Coxthane breathed, his scales rippling with shock. "You have installations in over 200 systems. How is this possible?" Captain Morales smiled grimly. 20 years of preparation. We knew this day would come, so we built for it. Hidden bases, weapon stockpiles, automated defense platforms. We've been seeding the galaxy with everything we'd need for the final battle. The scope of human preparation was staggering. They hadn't just been fighting the Devourers, they'd been playing a galactic chess game, positioning assets and resources for a conflict most species didn't even believe was coming. "The key to beating Devourers," Colonel Stone explained, highlighting tactical positions throughout the map, "is understanding how they hunt. They're not just predators, they're farmers. They cultivate fear, let it spread through populations, then harvest the resulting chaos. Panic makes their feeding easier." Ambassador Yilnara's crystalline form pulsed with patterns indicating deep thought. "You're saying they use psychological warfare as much as physical force?" "More," Major Chen confirmed. "A terrified population makes mistakes, runs into ambushes, abandons defensive positions. Devourers have perfected the art of making their prey defeat themselves." The holographic display shifted, showing recorded battles between human forces and Devourer swarms. The footage was horrifying: massive organic ships that seemed to grow rather than be built, disgorging waves of creatures that defied easy description. But what caught everyone's attention was how the humans fought back. No retreat, no panic, no negotiation, just methodical, brutal destruction. "This is what sets humans apart," Stone continued. "We don't just fight to survive, we fight to win, completely, utterly. When we commit to warfare, we commit to victory regardless of cost." The recordings showed human ships ramming Devourer vessels rather than allowing them to escape. Soldiers fighting to the last round, then continuing with improvised weapons. Entire crews choosing to detonate their ship's reactors rather than allow the enemy to board. "Your species is insane," Admiral Coxthane said, but there was admiration in his voice rather than condemnation. "Probably," Captain Morales agreed, "but insanity is exactly what you need to fight an enemy like this. They count on rational beings making rational choices, running when flight is logical, surrendering when resistance seems futile. Humans don't do rational when we're angry enough." The next several hours were spent in detailed tactical planning. Human strategic knowledge combined with Council resources was producing war plans that neither species could have developed alone. The Council brought superior technology, vast manufacturing capacity, and detailed knowledge of galactic geography. Humans brought experience, tactical innovation, and an understanding of how to fight an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with. But as the planning session continued, uncomfortable truths began to emerge. The numbers weren't encouraging. Even with everything they were bringing to bear, the Devourer swarm was massive, larger than any threat the galaxy had faced in recorded history. "Worst-case scenarios?" Zethkar asked during a brief break. Stone's expression darkened. "We lose 60% of Council territory before we can establish an effective defense line, maybe 70% if they've learned new tricks since our last major engagement. Best case? We hold them at the outer rim and push them back system by system over the next decade. And if we lose? Then this becomes the last generation of galactic civilization. The Devourers don't leave survivors who might evolve new defenses. When they're done feeding, they sterilize everything behind them." The weight of responsibility was crushing. Every decision they made in the coming weeks would determine whether thousands of species lived or died, whether 10 millennia of galactic civilization survived or became nothing more than organic fuel for an ancient hunger. But there was also something else growing in the room, something the Council had never experienced before. Unity forged not through discussion and compromise, but through shared purpose and common threat. For the first time in their history, every species in the Council was working toward the same goal with the same desperate intensity. "There's something else," Major Chen said quietly. "Something we haven't told you yet, about why we're really here." The room fell silent, waiting. "Earth is gone," she continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. "Not destroyed, but consumed. The Devourers took our homeworld 6 months ago. We evacuated what we could, but most of humanity died defending the planet." The implications hit like a physical blow. These humans weren't fighting to save their own world. They were fighting to prevent other species from suffering the same fate they had already endured. "You're refugees," Zethkar said, understanding finally dawning. "We're the last of humanity," Colonel Stone confirmed. "About 3 million people scattered across 40 ships. We came here because this is our last chance to strike back. If we can't stop them here, at the heart of galactic civilization, then nowhere is safe." Captain Morales stepped forward. "That's why we're going to win. Because we have to. Because if we don't, then everything we've lost means nothing." The transformation in the room was immediate and profound. What had begun as military cooperation between species became something deeper, a shared understanding that they were fighting not just for territory or resources, but for the very concept of civilization itself. Over the next week, the pace of preparation intensified beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Entire worlds converted to weapons production. Civilian populations trained in basic combat techniques. Ancient treaties were rewritten to allow for military cooperation on an unprecedented scale. The humans had done more than teach the Council to fight. They had shown them what it meant to have something worth fighting for. And as the Devourer swarm drew closer to Council space, Both species prepared for a battle that would determine the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. The first Devourer scouts arrived exactly when Colonel Stone had predicted. Long-range sensors detected the dimensional rifts 37 days after the humans' arrival at Council Space, massive tears in reality through which organic nightmares began to pour. Admiral Coxthane stood on the bridge of the Council's flagship, watching the tactical displays with newly trained military eyes. The past month had transformed him from a ceremonial naval officer into something he'd never imagined becoming. A warrior prepared to die for his beliefs. "Enemy formations emerging from fold space," reported Lieutenant Commander Veltar, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. "Initial count suggests 67 vessels ranging from frigate to, by the ancestors, sir. That largest one is 40 kilometers long." Through the viewing port, space itself seemed to writhe as the Devourer ships materialized. They weren't built so much as grown organic curves and ridges that pulsed with their own internal light. Biomechanical hybrids that blurred the line between ship and creature, weapon and organism. But the most unsettling aspect was how they moved. Unlike the precise trajectories of technological vessels, these ships undulated through space like massive predators swimming through an invisible ocean. "Contact from Human Fleet Command," the communications officer announced. "Colonel Stone is requesting immediate tactical conference." Stone's image appeared on the main screen, and Coxthane was struck by how much the human had changed over the past month. The hard edges had become sharper, the eyes more focused. This wasn't just a soldier anymore. This was a man preparing for what might be his final battle. "Admiral, are your forces in position?" "All Council fleets report ready," Coxthane confirmed. 237 vessels, armed with human-designed weapons and crewed by species who 3 months ago didn't know how to fire a plasma rifle. "Good enough. Remember, we don't try to match them ship for ship. We use mobility, surprise, and concentrated fire. Make them think, make them react, keep them off balance until we can spring the main trap." The battle plan they developed was unlike anything in Council military history. Instead of the traditional formation engagements favored by civilized warfare, they would fight like guerrillas on a galactic scale. Hit-and-run attacks, ambush tactics, and psychological warfare designed to exploit the one weakness humans had identified in Devourer psychology. They expected their prey to behave like prey. "Devourer advance elements are moving toward the Kepler system," Major Chen's voice crackled through the comm. "Right on schedule. All human stealth platforms are in position." Through the tactical display, Coxthane could see the hidden assets Colonel Stone had revealed. Automated weapon platforms disguised as asteroids, missile swarms waiting in the shadow of moons, entire fleets of small, fast ships that had been invisible to sensors until the humans activated their transponders. The scope of preparation was staggering. While the Council had been debating and training, the humans had been seeding every potential battlefield with nasty surprises. "Enemy vessels are entering the Kepler system," reported the sensor operator. They're beginning to feed." The images transmitted from the system were horrifying. Devourer ships attached themselves to planetary surfaces like massive parasites, extending organic drilling apparatus deep into the crust. Within hours, entire continents began to wither and die as some kind of biological extraction process drained the life from everything it touched. But the humans had anticipated this. They'd studied Devourer feeding patterns for 20 years, and they knew the creatures were most vulnerable when gorging themselves on planetary resources. "Execute Phase 1, Stone commanded. Space around the Kepler system suddenly erupted with weapons fire. What the Devourers had assumed was empty space revealed itself to be filled with hidden weapon platforms, kinetic projectiles launched from concealed positions. Plasma bursts emerged from behind asteroids. Missile swarms that had been drifting like space debris suddenly activated their engines. The surprise was total. 3 Devourer vessels died in the first 30 seconds, their organic hulls ruptured by weapons designed specifically to target biological tissue. The remaining enemy ships writhed in apparent pain, their feeding apparatus retracting as they tried to understand what was happening. "All Council forces, this is Admiral Coxthane," he broadcast across the combined fleet. "Execute Assault Pattern Omega. Remember your training. Fight like humans." It was a strange battle cry for species that had never wanted to be warriors, but it worked. Council ships poured out of hyperspace in perfectly coordinated formations, their crews applying months of human tactical training with desperate intensity. The Vraxian Third Fleet came in high, raking Devourer formations with concentrated plasma fire. The Crystalline Defense Force materialized from behind the system's primary star, their ship's energy shields redirecting solar radiation into focused beam weapons. Even the traditionally peaceful Ethereal Collective had joined the battle, their advanced technology adapted into weapons that could disrupt biological nervous systems. But it was the human contribution that truly turned the tide. Captain Morales led a squadron of small, fast ships through impossible maneuvers, diving between Devourer vessels and deploying biological weapons specifically designed to target their organic components. The enemy ships began to show signs of actual distress, their movements becoming erratic as human biotoxins spread through their living systems. "Enemy reinforcements incoming," warned the tactical officer. "Massive dimensional rifts opening throughout the sector." This was what they'd been preparing for. The initial engagement was just the bait. The real Devourer fleet was about to arrive, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. The rifts tore open like wounds in space itself, and what emerged defied easy description. Hundreds of organic ships, some larger than space stations, began pouring into Council territory. But more than their size or numbers, it was their obvious intelligence that chilled everyone who saw them. These weren't just predators, they were strategists. The new arrivals immediately began coordinating with the survivors from the first wave, establishing complex formation patterns that suggested sophisticated tactical thinking. "Colonel Stone," Admiral Coxthane called out, "they're adapting faster than our projections suggested. Recommend we advance to Phase 2 immediately." Stone's image nodded grimly. "Agreed. All human vessels, implement Tactical Doctrine 77 Alpha. Council forces, prepare for close engagement protocols." What followed was the largest space battle in galactic history. Hundreds of ships on both sides, fighting across multiple star systems simultaneously. The Council forces fought with desperate courage, applying human tactics with the innovative adaptation that had made their species masters of technology and diplomacy. But the Devourers were learning too. Each engagement taught them something new about their prey's capabilities. Their organic ships began developing resistances to human bioweapons. Their tactics evolved to counter Council strategies. Worst of all, they began demonstrating an understanding of psychological warfare that rivaled humanity's own expertise. "Sir," reported Major Chen from her command ship, "we're taking heavy losses. The enemy is adapting to our weapons faster than anticipated." Zethkar, who had insisted on serving aboard the flagship despite his diplomatic rank, watched the tactical displays with growing dread. They were winning individual battles, but the enemy kept coming. For every Devourer ship they destroyed, 2 more emerged from fold space. "Colonel Stone," he said quietly, "how many more do they have?" The human's expression was grim. "According to our intelligence, this is roughly 10% of their total force. They're testing us, learning our capabilities before committing their main fleet." The implications were staggering. If this massive armada was just a scouting force, then the true Devourer invasion would be unstoppable by conventional means. But Stone's expression suddenly changed. taking on the hard smile that his soldiers had learned to recognize. Which is exactly what we want them to think. Admiral, prepare all forces for emergency jump. We're implementing the Alamo Protocol. Coxthane felt his scales ripple with recognition. The Alamo Protocol was the most desperate gambit in their battle plans. It required abandoning most of Council space and falling back to a prepared position where they could make their final stand. All vessels, he broadcast, execute emergency jump to Rally Point Alpha. Human Command is implementing Alamo Protocol. Across the battle space, Council and human ships began vanishing into hyperspace, leaving the Devourers in apparent victory. From their perspective, they had successfully driven off the Defenders and could continue their feeding operations unopposed. They had no idea they were being led into the largest military trap in galactic history. Rally Point Alpha was a system the humans had been secretly fortifying for 15 years. 3 planets converted into massive weapons platforms. Asteroid belts seeded with automated defense systems, a primary star modified to serve as the galaxy's largest fusion weapon. More importantly, it was where the survivors of Earth had made their home. 3 million humans living on fortified habitats, working in weapons factories, training for the day when they could strike back against the creatures that had destroyed their world. "Welcome to New Terra," Colonel Stone said as the combined fleets emerged from hyperspace. "This is where we make our stand." The system was a marvel of military engineering. Every planet, moon, and asteroid had been converted into a defensive position, weapons emplacements that could shatter continents, shield generators powerful enough to deflect stellar radiation, and everywhere signs of human determination, memorials to the fallen, battle flags from Earth's military units, and the faces of people who had lost everything but refused to surrender. "Estimated time until Devourer arrival?" asked Admiral Coxthane. 6 hours, Major Chen replied. "Long-range sensors indicate they're bringing everything. The entire swarm, over 3,000 vessels." Zeth Carr looked around the command center, seeing species that had never wanted to be soldiers preparing for what might be their final battle. Crystalline beings checking plasma charges, ethereal entities coordinating with AI systems, scaled reptilians and chitinous insects working alongside feathered avians and energy-based consciousness forms. The Galactic Council had become something it was never intended to be. An alliance of warriors united against extinction. "All stations report ready," came the announcement from Human Command. "Weapon systems at maximum charge, defense platforms active, stellar modification sequence armed and ready." Captain Morales approached their group, his face bearing the same grim determination they'd all learned to wear. "Whatever happens in the next few hours, remember one thing. We're not just fighting for our own survival. We're fighting to prove that civilized beings can become warriors when civilization itself is threatened." Through the viewing ports, space began to twist as massive dimensional rifts tore open. The Devourer swarm was arriving, and it was larger than anyone had imagined possible. The final battle for galactic civilization was about to begin. Admiral Zefix adjusted his ceremonial collar as the broadcast cameras focused on the execution platform. The gleaming metal structure stood in the center of the Imperial Grand Arena, where billions across the Corvani Empire watched through neural feeds. Today would mark the end of human resistance once and for all. The prisoner stood defiant despite the neural dampeners. Sarah Chen, barely 19 years old, wore simple prison clothes that couldn't hide her unwavering spirit. Her dark hair fell across determined eyes that refused to show fear. The crowd of alien dignitaries murmured their approval from the viewing boxes high above. "Citizens of the Empire," Admiral Zefix announced, his voice carried across 1,000 star systems. "Today we eliminate the last vestige of human defiance. This terrorist has murdered Imperial citizens and destroyed our property. Her execution will demonstrate what happens to those who oppose our rightful rule." Sarah lifted her chin higher. The neural dampeners prevented her from speaking loudly, but the sensitive broadcast equipment caught her whispered words. "You think killing me ends this? You have no idea what humans are capable of when you hurt our family." The Admiral sneered, his reptilian features twisting with contempt. "Humans are weak. Your species fell to our might in mere months. Your planets burn under our rule. Your people serve as slaves in our factories. You are nothing but primitive mammals who stumbled into space technology you could never truly understand." Around the galaxy, humans in hiding listened through stolen broadcast receivers. In the mining colonies of Tau Ceti, workers paused their labor. In the underground bunkers of New Geneva, resistance fighters gathered around crackling screens. On the prison ships orbiting dead Earth, survivors pressed against viewing ports to catch glimpses of the transmission. Sarah's execution device hummed to life. The Corvani preferred disintegration, slow, painful, and complete. It would take exactly 60 seconds for the beam to reduce a human to constituent atoms. The process was designed to be horrifying, a deterrent to others who might consider rebellion. "Any final words, human?" Admiral Zefix asked, gesturing for the cameras to focus on Sarah's face. Sarah looked directly into the nearest camera, knowing her words would reach every corner of known space. Her voice remained steady despite the circumstances. "My name is Sarah Chen. I am the daughter of Dr. Marcus Chen and engineer Lisa Wong Chen. I am human, and I am not afraid. We are more than you think we are. We are more than we think we are. And when you realize what you've done today, it will be too late." The Admiral activated the device. Energy crackled around Sarah as the disintegration field formed. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She stood straight and kept her eyes open, staring defiantly at her executioners as her body began to dissolve. But something was wrong. The readings on the execution device fluctuated wildly. Energy patterns that should have been stable began oscillating in impossible ways. The technicians monitoring the equipment exchanged worried glances as their instruments registered values that violated known physics. "Continue the execution," Admiral Zefix ordered, noticing the hesitation. Sarah's form became translucent as the disintegration beam intensified. But instead of simply vanishing, something extraordinary happened. Her dissolving particles began to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the execution device. The glow spread outward in expanding rings, visible to the cameras and the horrified crowd. "What is this?" the Admiral demanded. The chief technician's scales had gone pale with fear. "Sir, the quantum resonance is off the charts. The human's neural patterns aren't dissipating. They're amplifying." Sarah's voice came one last time, somehow audible even as her physical form completed its dissolution. "We are connected in ways you cannot understand. We are Legion. We are coming." The light from her dissolution point continued expanding, now filling the entire arena. Panic spread through the alien audience as their sensitive eyes were overwhelmed by the brilliance. Emergency systems activated, trying to contain what they couldn't identify or understand. 26 light-years away, Dr. Marcus Chen felt his daughter die. He was working in the hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of CERN, where a small group of human scientists had been developing theoretical physics beyond anything the Empire suspected. The moment Sarah's quantum signature vanished, every human in the galaxy felt an echo of loss that resonated through the quantum foam itself. Marcus had spent 3 years since Earth's fall developing his theories about quantum consciousness and species-wide neural networks. Humans, he had discovered, were naturally quantum entangled at a level that evolution had only barely begun to exploit. Strong emotions, particularly trauma and death, could trigger resonance cascades that affected every human simultaneously. The grief of losing Sarah didn't just break her father's heart, It activated something that had been dormant in human DNA for millennia. The quantum field fluctuations from her execution rippled outward faster than light, carried by the same mysterious forces that enabled faster-than-light travel itself. On mining colony Kepler 442b, human slaves suddenly stopped their work as inexplicable rage filled their minds. The emotion wasn't their own, but it felt more real than anything they had experienced since the conquest. Overseers tried to activate punishment collars, but the devices sparked and failed as quantum interference disrupted their electronics. In the prison ships, humans who had been broken and defeated suddenly stood straighter. The despair that had consumed them for 3 years evaporated, replaced by crystalline fury and purpose. They looked at each other with new understanding, as if seeing family members for the first time in years. Admiral Zephyx watched his arena's systems fail one by one as the quantum cascade spread. The execution platform itself had become a pillar of light that his technicians couldn't shut down or contain. Emergency broadcasts flooded his communication arrays as reports came in from across the Empire. "Sir, we're receiving distress calls from Sector 7. Human workers have somehow disabled their restraint systems." "Admiral, the mining operations on Vega Colony have gone silent. Last transmission reported the humans had taken control of the facilities." "Command, this is urgent. Every human on Rigel Station has simultaneously broken free of their conditioning. Security forces are requesting immediate backup." The Admiral stared at the expanding light that had once been Sarah Chen. "How is this possible? They're just humans." His science officer, a insectoid Kythera, consulted rapidly updating data displays. "Sir, we're detecting quantum coherence patterns originating from the execution point. The phenomenon appears to be spreading through subspace at velocities exceeding light speed by several orders of magnitude. Every human in the galaxy is being affected simultaneously." The truth was more complex than even the Kythera scientist could understand. Humans weren't just individuals who happened to share similar DNA. They were components of a single, vast quantum organism that had evolved over millions of years to survive by cooperation and shared consciousness. The Empire had mistaken humanity's kindness for weakness, their cooperation for primitiveness. Sarah's execution had done more than kill one young woman. It had awakened a sleeping giant that stretched across the galaxy. Every human slave, every prisoner, every survivor hiding in the ruins of conquered worlds suddenly remembered who they really were. They were not separate beings struggling alone against impossible odds. They were humanity, and humanity was angry. The quantum resonance reached Earth's moon, where the Empire had established their regional command center. Human maintenance workers in the lower levels felt the change first. Danny Kuroda had been fixing atmospheric processors for 2 years, head down, spirit broken. When Sarah's death echo reached him, he stood up and really looked around for the first time since the conquest. The access panels he had been repairing weren't just life support systems. They were the primary computer cores that controlled defense satellites throughout the system. Danny had been walking past the Empire's most sensitive equipment for months, invisible because his captors saw him as nothing more than a useful animal. Now he saw the irony. The Empire had built their control systems using human technology they had seized during the conquest. The interfaces were still in human languages. The security codes were based on human mathematical principles. They had handed the keys to their kingdom to the very people they enslaved, never imagining that humans might someday remember how to use them. Danny pulled out his maintenance tools and began to work with new purpose. He wasn't just fixing systems anymore, he was preparing for war. The quantum resonance had been spreading for 18 minutes when the first Imperial fleet went dark. Captain Vorthak commanded the dreadnought Eternal Dominion on patrol near the Centauri system when his human maintenance crew simply vanished. Not literally. They were still physically present in the lower decks. But something fundamental had changed in their behavior. The broken, submissive beings who had scrubbed his ship's corridors for 3 years had transformed into something else entirely. Chief Engineer Maria Santos had been working in the reactor core when Sarah's death reached her consciousness. The quantum echo carried more than just emotional resonance, it carried information. Suddenly, Maria understood exactly how the Empire's technology functioned. She saw the vulnerabilities in their power systems, the weaknesses in their defensive arrays, the fatal flaws in their supposedly superior engineering. The Empire had made a critical error. They had assumed that because humans lost the war, human technology was inferior. In reality, Corvani science was thousands of years behind human innovation. The Empire won through numbers and brutality, not superior intellect. Their ships were powered by fusion reactors that human scientists had considered obsolete for decades. Maria moved through the ship's engineering sections with new confidence. Every human worker she encountered had the same look of awakening in their eyes. They didn't need to speak. The quantum link that connected their species allowed for instantaneous communication of complex ideas. Within minutes, every human on the ship understood the plan. The Eternal Dominion carried a crew of 8,000 aliens and 400 human slaves. Those numbers were about to become irrelevant. Maria reached the primary reactor control room, where Corvani engineers monitored the ship's power systems. They noticed her approach but didn't consider her a threat. She was just another human laborer, conditioned to be invisible and harmless. She walked directly to the main control console and began entering commands. The Corvani engineers started to object, but Maria had already activated a feedback loop in the reactor's magnetic containment system. The ship's lights flickered as power fluctuated wildly. "Human, step away from those controls!" the lead engineer hissed, reaching for his weapon. Maria turned to face him with eyes that no longer held any trace of fear. "No." That single word carried the weight of an entire species' rage. The quantum connection had given every human access to the collective knowledge and determination of their people. Maria wasn't just one frightened worker anymore. She was the voice of billions who had died under imperial rule. The reactor's containment field collapsed in a controlled cascade that Maria had calculated to spread throughout the ship's power grid. Emergency lighting activated as the main systems failed, but the damage was precisely targeted. Weapon systems went offline. Life support continued functioning. Communications arrays began broadcasting on human frequencies that the Empire had never learned to intercept. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as the quantum awakening reached every human in captivity. On the mining world of Kepler 452b, slave laborers discovered that their overseers' weapons relied on power cells that could be overloaded with simple modifications. The Empire had forced humans to manufacture their own oppression, never realizing that every human worker understood exactly how to reverse the process. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves had been working in the weapons factories of Proxima Centauri for 30 months. The Corvani had valued her engineering expertise, but kept her under constant surveillance and neural inhibitors. When the quantum resonance reached her, the inhibitors simply stopped working, not because they were damaged, but because human consciousness had evolved beyond the Empire's ability to contain it. Elizabeth looked around the factory floor where hundreds of humans assembled plasma rifles for Imperial forces. Every one of her fellow workers had the same expression of sudden understanding. They weren't victims anymore. They were saboteurs who had been handed the tools to destroy their enemies from within. The weapons they had been building contained hidden modifications that Elizabeth had unconsciously incorporated months ago. Her suppressed knowledge had found ways to express itself, even through neural dampening. Every plasma rifle that left the factory would fail catastrophically when fired in combat. Every piece of armor would develop critical weaknesses under stress. Every vehicle would suffer mysterious systems failures at crucial moments. The Empire had been arming themselves with deliberately defective equipment for years without knowing it. But the quantum awakening brought more than just knowledge and coordination. It brought something that the Empire had never seen in humans before: unified purpose. Every human in the galaxy suddenly shared the same goal with crystalline clarity. They were going home. They were going to rebuild. And they were going to make sure that no one ever threatened humanity again. On the prison ship, Torment's Edge, orbiting the ruins of Mars, convicted resistance leader Colonel James Harrison felt the change wash over him. The neural suppression collar around his neck sparked and went dead as his enhanced consciousness simply overwhelmed its limiting circuits. Around him, 3,000 human prisoners experienced the same liberation. Harrison had been a military strategist before the conquest, one of the few who had recognized the true scope of the Imperial threat. He had tried to warn Earth's governments that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before, not just technologically advanced, but fundamentally different in their approach to warfare and conquest. The Empire didn't just want to defeat humanity. They wanted to break the human spirit completely, to transform Earth's people into a permanent underclass that would never again pose a threat to Imperial dominance. They had studied human psychology and developed techniques specifically designed to crush hope and resistance. Those techniques had worked for 3 years, but they had never been tested against a quantum-linked species whose consciousness could evolve beyond conventional limitations. Harrison stood in his cell and spoke in a normal voice, knowing that every human on the ship would hear him through their quantum connection. "Attention, all personnel. This is Colonel Harrison assuming command. We are no longer prisoners. We are a military unit operating behind enemy lines. All human crew report to designated rally points. We have work to do." The response was immediate and coordinated. Humans throughout the ship began moving with purpose, no longer shuffling like broken slaves, but walking like soldiers who had remembered their mission. They had been kept alive as a psychological weapon against their own species, proof that humanity could be broken and tamed. Now they became something far more dangerous. They became an army that their enemies had trained, equipped, and positioned throughout their own empire. The quantum resonance had been active for 23 minutes when Admiral Zefix received the first coherent report of what was happening. His communication officer, a pale Altarian, delivered the news with obvious confusion. "Sir, we're receiving reports from 17 sectors. Human populations have somehow coordinated simultaneous uprisings across distances that should make such coordination impossible. The rebellions appear to be following identical tactical patterns despite having no apparent communication between sectors." Admiral Zefix studied the tactical displays showing red warning indicators appearing throughout Imperial space. "That's impossible. Humans don't have faster-than-light communication technology. Their species lacks the neural complexity for quantum consciousness networks." His science advisor, Dr. Nethys, consulted her readings from the execution platform. The energy signature from Sarah Chen's death had stabilized into a pattern that defied conventional understanding. "Admiral, I'm detecting quantum entanglement signatures that suggest these humans are operating as a single distributed organism. Their consciousness appears to be linked at the subatomic level." "Explain that in terms I can understand," Zefix demanded. "Think of them as individual cells in a vast body that has suddenly awakened. Each human is simultaneously separate and part of something much larger. When we executed that female, we didn't kill an individual. We injured the entire species at once." The implications were staggering. The Empire had built their control strategy around the assumption that humans were individuals who could be isolated and manipulated through standard psychological techniques. If humans were actually components of a larger consciousness, then every aspect of Imperial human management was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what they were dealing with. Zefix's tactical display showed the scope of the crisis expanding by the minute. Human uprisings had been reported on 47 worlds. Imperial fleet communications were being jammed by signals originating from human-occupied vessels. Defense installations throughout the Empire were going offline as their human maintenance crews revealed themselves to be saboteurs. But the most disturbing reports were coming from Earth itself. The planet had been left deliberately devastated as an object lesson to other species who might consider resisting Imperial rule. Most of its major cities were radioactive ruins. The surviving human population had been relocated to labor camps or transported off-world as slaves. Earth was supposed to be a dead monument to the consequences of defying the Empire. Instead, it was showing signs of coordinated activity that suggested millions of humans had been hiding in places the Empire had never suspected. Deep underground installations were powering up for the first time since the conquest. Massive construction projects that had been dormant for years were suddenly resuming operation. Most troubling of all, the quantum signatures emanating from Earth suggested that the planet's human population was far larger than Imperial estimates. Either humans had been reproducing at impossible rates under apocalyptic conditions, or there had always been more of them than the Empire had realized. Lieutenant Zarek, the Admiral's intelligence officer, provided the answer. "Sir, our census data appears to have been systematically falsified. The humans have been hiding their actual population numbers since the initial conquest. Based on current quantum resonance patterns, there may be 10 times more humans alive than our estimates indicated." Admiral Zefix felt something he had not experienced in his long military career: genuine fear. The Empire had conquered what they believed was a primitive species of roughly 8 billion individuals. If the humans had actually numbered closer to 80 billion, and if they had been coordinating resistance activities through quantum consciousness for 3 years without Imperial knowledge. "Get me direct communication with Imperial Command," he ordered. "Priority Alpha emergency protocols. We have a significant problem." 26 minutes after Sarah Chen's execution, the Corvani Empire received its first surrender request from one of its own fleets. Captain Vorthak's voice came across the emergency frequencies with obvious strain. "Imperial Command, this is Captain Vorthak of the Eternal Dominion. I am formally requesting immediate evacuation of all Corvani personnel from this vessel. The human crew has assumed control of all ship systems. I repeat, the humans have taken control." The silence that followed this transmission stretched across the command center of the Imperial dreadnought, Supreme Authority. Emperor Corvex himself stood before the tactical displays, watching red indicators spread like an infection throughout his territory. In 26 minutes, the greatest empire in galactic history had lost operational control of approximately 30% of its military assets. "How many ships?" the Emperor asked. Admiral Zefix consulted his reports with hands that trembled slightly. 1,700 vessels have either gone dark or reported human takeovers, my lord. The pattern appears to be accelerating." The truth was worse than anyone in Imperial Command understood. The quantum awakening hadn't just affected humans in Imperial custody. It had reached every human in the galaxy, including populations that the Empire had never known existed. On the hidden colony world of New Geneva, established secretly during the early years of human space expansion, Dr. Sarah Kimura received the quantum echo of her namesake's death with tears streaming down her face. New Geneva was home to 40 million humans who had been living in complete isolation for over a century, developing technologies that the galactic community had never imagined. The colony's founders had been paranoid visionaries who believed that humanity would eventually face an existential threat from space. They had built New Geneva to be completely self-sufficient and utterly hidden, using experimental technology to mask the planet's quantum signature from conventional sensors. For 3 years, New Geneva had monitored the Empire's conquest of known human space while debating whether to reveal themselves. The quantum awakening ended that debate instantly. Sarah Chen's sacrifice had connected them to the rest of humanity's pain, and they would not stand by while their species suffered. Dr. Kimura activated communication systems that had been dormant for decades. This is New Geneva Command to all human resistance forces. We are uploading strategic data and technical specifications to the quantum network. Begin immediate implementation of Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was New Geneva's contingency plan for liberating humanity from alien oppression. It had been developed over generations by the best military and scientific minds of the colony. Every human who received the quantum transmission suddenly understood their role in a coordinated campaign that would have seemed impossible hours earlier. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and precision. Human saboteurs embedded throughout Imperial infrastructure would simultaneously cripple the Empire's ability to function. Hidden resistance cells would emerge from concealment to seize strategic resources. Most importantly, humanity's true technological capabilities would be revealed for the first time. The Empire had conquered known human space, but they had never encountered humanity's real scientific achievements. The colonies they had enslaved represented humanity's first tentative steps into space, using primitive fusion drives and conventional weapons. New Geneva and a dozen other hidden colonies had spent decades perfecting technologies that made Imperial science look like ancient history. Commander Elena Vasquez had been waiting for 3 years in the asteroid belt beyond Pluto, commanding a stealth fleet of ships that the Empire had never detected. Her vessels used quantum tunneling drives that could cross interstellar distances in hours rather than weeks. Their weapon systems were based on controlled singularity generation and matter conversion on the atomic level. When the quantum awakening reached her fleet, Elena finally received the authorization she had been hoping for. All ships, this is Phoenix Command. Execute Liberation Protocol. Primary objectives are Imperial command structures and fleet concentrations. Rules of engagement are now unrestricted. Show them what humans are really capable of. 47 ships materialized from quantum stealth around Earth's moon, where Imperial Regional Command had never suspected their presence. The base's defensive systems activated automatically, but their targeting computers couldn't lock on to vessels that existed in a state of quantum superposition. The lead ship, Retribution, dropped out of stealth directly above the command complex. Its primary weapon was a focused gravitational distortion that could selectively target specific materials while leaving others unaffected. The base's defensive barriers, constructed from Corvani battle steel, simply ceased to exist as their atomic bonds were selectively disrupted. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the base as Imperial forces realized they were under attack by technology they couldn't understand. General Kithrix, the base commander, watched his strategic displays show impossible readings. How did they achieve orbital insertion without detection? Our sensors show nothing. His tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of campaigns, stared at the readings in disbelief. Sir, the attacking vessels appear to be phasing in and out of normal space. Their energy signatures don't match any known technology in our databases. The human fleet wasn't just attacking with superior weapons. They were demonstrating that human science had progressed far beyond anything in Imperial knowledge. The Empire had conquered primitive humans using conventional technology, but they now faced the true inheritors of Earth's scientific legacy. On worlds throughout Imperial space, similar scenes were playing out as hidden human capabilities revealed themselves. The mining operation on Kepler 442b discovered that their human workers had been secretly constructing advanced manufacturing facilities in abandoned mine shafts. Factory complexes that had been producing Imperial war materials for 3 years suddenly began manufacturing human technology that made Imperial equipment look like stone tools. But the most devastating revelation came from Earth itself. Dr. Marcus Chen emerged from the hidden laboratory beneath CERN with a device that would change the balance of galactic power forever. His grief over Sarah's death had catalyzed the final breakthrough in his quantum consciousness research. He now understood not just how humans were connected, but how that connection could be weaponized. The quantum field that linked human consciousness wasn't limited to their own species. With the right modulation, it could be extended to affect any sentient being with compatible neural structures. The device he carried could broadcast emotions and thoughts across interstellar distances, essentially turning the Empire's own population against their government. Marcus activated the device and focused on a single emotion: the desire for freedom. The quantum pulse that erupted from Earth carried that desire to every sentient being in the galaxy, amplified by the collective will of humanity's awakened consciousness. On Corvex Prime, the Empire's capital world, citizen slaves of dozens of species suddenly looked around and wondered why they were serving masters who treated them as property. The Empire's foundation was built on the oppression of conquered peoples, but those peoples had never before experienced the liberating power of coordinated resistance. Revolts began simultaneously on 700 worlds as the quantum freedom pulse reached them. The Empire's military found itself fighting not just awakened humans, but entire populations of former slaves who had suddenly remembered what it meant to be free. Emperor Corvex stood in his throne room watching the collapse of everything he had built. His empire was crumbling not because of superior enemy forces, but because the psychological foundations of his power had been systematically undermined by a species he had dismissed as primitive. "My lord," Admiral Zefix reported through emergency communications, "we have confirmation of total system failures across 17 sectors. Human forces are using technology that appears to violate known physics. Our tactical databases have no counter-strategies for the weapons systems they're deploying." The Emperor looked at the strategic display showing his empire dissolving in real time. Red indicators marked lost territories, failed communications, and fleet units that had simply vanished from Imperial control. In less than 30 minutes, the mightiest civilization in galactic history had been reduced to a collection of isolated strongholds. "How did we miss this?" he asked. "How did we fail to understand what we were fighting?" Admiral Zefix's response was barely audible. "We saw what we expected to see, my lord. We assumed that because humans lost the initial war, they were inferior. We never considered that they might have been holding back their true capabilities, or that their defeat might have been strategic." The terrible truth was becoming clear. Humanity hadn't lost the war. They had sacrificed themselves to position their people throughout the Empire. Every human slave, every prisoner, every broken survivor had actually been a deep-cover operative in the longest intelligence mission in galactic history. The Empire had spent 3 years distributing human agents to every critical facility, every strategic location, every sensitive position in Imperial space. Sarah Chen's execution had been the signal for activation. On New Geneva, Dr. Sarah Kimura received reports from across the galaxy as human operations completed their objectives. The Empire's command structure was dismantled. Their fleet was either captured or crippled. Their industrial base was under human control. Most importantly, their psychological dominance over conquered species had been shattered by the quantum freedom pulse. "Status report," she requested from the quantum network. The response came from thousands of human voices speaking as one. "Liberation protocols successful. Imperial resistance minimal. Total victory achieved in 26 minutes, 17 seconds. Humanity is free. The galaxy is free." Dr. Kimura turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to the Emperor's personal frequency." The transmission reached Corvex Prime, where Emperor Corvex sat alone in his empty throne room. His guards had fled. His advisors had disappeared. Even Admiral Zefix had abandoned the capital for parts unknown. Sarah Kimura's voice echoed through the vast chamber with calm authority. Emperor Corvex, this is Dr. Sarah Kimura speaking on behalf of free humanity and all liberated peoples of the galaxy. Your empire is finished. Your fleets have surrendered. Your worlds have declared independence. Your people are free to choose their own destiny for the first time in centuries. The Emperor's reply was bitter and defeated. How? How did a primitive species accomplish this? We're not primitive, Sarah replied. We're patient, we're adaptive, and we never forget our family. You executed Sarah Chen thinking you were killing one defiant girl. Instead, you awakened something that your empire was never equipped to face. An entire species that refuses to surrender, refuses to be broken, and refuses to let any sentient being live in chains. The transmission ended, leaving Emperor Corvex alone with the ruins of his ambitions. Outside his palace windows, he could see the lights of celebration as his former subjects celebrated their liberation. In the silence that followed, he finally understood what Admiral Zephix had tried to tell him. They hadn't been fighting humans. They had been fighting humanity itself, a vast, patient, implacable force that had turned the Empire's own strength against it. 26 minutes after one human girl died for her principles, the greatest tyranny in galactic history had fallen. But more importantly, billions of sentient beings had learned what humans had always known, that freedom was worth any sacrifice, and that no empire could stand against people who remembered how to be free. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity would never again be underestimated.